So let's get going. Dino is a short half-hour thing we do every week, open to the public, just kind of chat about two different topics. The number one topic is always going to be what happened this week, just kind of a quick weekly recap. And this was a crazy week, with the beginnings of the SVP thing and then that getting priced in. And, if you look at the TPO view, the market got crushed and then it's trying to hold a range at the low. And you can see, with mixed success, depending on which index you're looking at. Oddly, NQ is the strongest in the pattern right now. And if you were at my session this morning, I was scalping NQ long. And that's one of the reasons is, tech is the only thing holding us up today. And it held us up yesterday. So that's one of the themes of the week. There's money flowing into tech and money flowing out of primarily banking, but just about everything else other than some consumer stuff. And I'd say the market's, in my opinion, the market's kind of at a very, very important spot to hold. The bears have been assertive a few times and we've had some pretty good pushes down. But clearly, if you look at the tails on the ESTPOs, the market found buyers down there. Most of the volume is above the lows, although there's some old artifacts that are there we could revisit. This is a 4-week low. Single prints everywhere. It's a very sloppy, high volatile, giant range, but more or less the conclusion of the week and the theme of the week here is we tried to push lower and we had buying down there. And now we've tried to get out of this range and we haven't been able to. So, this is a behavior we've seen over the last few months over and over again. Respect the short-term ranges, whether it's LRC ranges when you're scalping or it's the range of the week. This is very, very notable. And another part of this, I'll drag another screen or another chart over here from my other monitor just to make a point. One of the other things I started doing, and I mentioned this too in some other sessions, in addition to looking at the daily VWAP extremes, the SD1 through 4 of the VWAP, I've also started doing that on a weekly basis. And let me just zoom this out to 15 minutes and you'll see what I mean. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the VWAPs, but I'm anchoring it for the week, not for the day. So, if I'm looking at the daily one, here, I'll bring this over here too. So that's ES and I'll put it over. This is ES's daily extremes. The blue line's the VWAP. And you can see we just kind of been riding SD2 down today and we're finding a little bit of strength down here. And we were just talking about that, can it hold it? And then these are the weekly ones on this other view. And it kind of gives you a sense of, look at the weekly range here and where the extremes of the volume are. We're pretty much working that off the low, but we're really not going anywhere. So again, this kind of helps me get a sense of the context when I'm scalping. I don't trade off this stuff, but I basically have two parts to my trading approach. One is what's the context, and the second part is what's the action right now. And you can see this price action is really, really tradable. If you were at the session this morning, you could scalp either way, long or short, all day. And that pretty much is the story of the week. If you watch each daily range, it's providing lots of opportunities at extremes, inside outs, outside ins. You just have to kind of not have too strong an opinion about what might happen because momentum has been king. And once the momentum gets going one way or another, it can go for a while. Look at the length of these tails down here. So you can't just automatically assume, that a low is going to get bought. You've got to wait till it actually starts getting bought. And then, it sets up a really good trade. We still have you. This is the session over here on the far right. We still have UB at the low of the pullback. And on the session, we actually have a price rejector down there, I think. Hang on a second. Let me zoom this out because I can't see it on that monitor. It gets too small. What exactly I'm seeing there. So, oh, you know what? Let me just go look at it on my big monitor, my portrait one, because there I can see it really well. You guys just won't see it, but I'll look there. And then I'll tell you what it is. Okay, was that stops or a price rejector? That was, in fact, a price rejector down there. Okay, so, pretty strong spot. We're kind of in the middle. We're at the bottom of all this volume. Again, that's yesterday. This is today. There's UB at the low and in the pullback of the low, obviously, that's the same. So, it's filling in all this volume. I don't, again, as I said this morning, I don't really see anything here from my scalping point of view that's all that useful, except, being respecting where the volume is and where the deltas are, because, those are leanable. And if I go back out to 3 minutes, which is what I just flipped these back over to, you can see the kind of rotations back and forth from supply and demand are really, really clear and predictable. And so on the domes, those are really tradable. And that's exactly what I was doing this morning if you were at that session. And I will probably do it again at the closing session. So join me for that. But the key point I want to make here about the week is just, this is a behavior we've now seen for several months, that, a range is really important until it breaks. And then you need to pay attention, because when it breaks, it can often go a long way. NQ is a really good example of that. It broke out of that low range. It did it yesterday, and it's holding up there. And again, that's another reason, if you were in that session, that I've been scalping long. I just really like the way NQ is holding up the rest of the market, and it may or may not continue to. But keep in mind, there's a whole lot of money on the sidelines in equity funds, and they don't have a choice. They have to get long. It's long money. The equity funds, by and large, aren't allowed to trade short. Most of them can hedge with futures, but they don't short. So, they're going to be looking to put money to work, and that's pretty obviously what's been happening in tech the last few days, because there's literally no place else for it to go. If you look at the heat map of the equities, it's like, other than tech, there's a lot of, look at the banking sector. It's just getting crushed again. And, these are not small moves, 4%, 5%, 7%, 11%, so you have to respect that this is a market that's trying to find its footing. And in the meantime, and I feel like a broken record on this, but momentum is king. Whichever way it's going, that has to be the first thing that you're paying attention to. And if it's going that way really quickly, hop on board. Those are turning out to be great trades. And if it's going up into exhaustion or down into exhaustion, and you're seeing, absorption the other direction, fade it. It's really been that simple. And by the way, boy, if you can add to that any artifacts, in my scalping world, if you can add UB, or you can add single prints, or you can add zero prints, or any good reason to do the momentum that I just mentioned, or fade the momentum I mentioned, then you just end up with a really, really hot setup. And, just take them. It's, there's good money out there. I posted my weekly P&L in the pit, and I didn't trade the beginning of the month at all, as you can see. I just started trading when I got here and got set up last Sunday, and it's going reasonably well this week. I can't complain, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and perspective in the second half of the Dino session, which is coming up in just a few minutes. But I had some really good direct experience with perspective in the last week when I was moving. And it's really relevant to trading, and I'm finding it's really impacting my trading this week too. Just having had that break and been able to do the method that I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute. But before I do that, I just wanted to make one other point here about the week. We're seeing a pattern over and over again here where we get, the advanced decline gets, we open, like today we opened weak and we just have been getting weaker. And yesterday we opened weak and we were just getting stronger. And again, this is my point about the momentum. And if you kind of look at the tick to figure out what's going on at the moment, right now we're getting stronger. The tick is really strong. And if you look at the price action, that's obvious. So one key point I think is important to take away from this week, and this is the last thing I'll leave you on the weekly summary with, is, remember, as perfect as the pricing is in the auction market that the index futures are that we all trade, they are derivatives of the indexes themselves, which are the equities. And so you can't just ignore what's going on in the equities. If you weren't looking right now and didn't realize that it's tech alone that's holding us up for the last 2 days, that's a really important piece of information, particularly if you're trading NQ. It explains the lack of correlation that we've had. And that's a really important piece. If you didn't know that, you could be lulled into shorting NQ here, which is the biggest mistake you can make, because NQ is the only thing that's going up from, with any sort of consistency, as I pointed out here on the TPO view. So anyway, that's kind of my Dino's weekly recap for the week. If there are any questions or comments on that, by all means, let me have them. I generally like to make this session really tight, just a half an hour, and I break it into two pieces. The first one is what we just did, which is, the weekly recap. I think this action is going to continue next week. We have two things going on that are at odds. The Fed's trying to control inflation, but now there's a banking crisis, and the way you handle those two things is exactly opposite. They might have to ease to handle the banking crisis. They already have a little bit in the overnight window and whatnot. And so could that create even more inflation? And then what are they going to do? I mean, everybody, the Fed is not perfect, and they're far from it. And they could easily lose control of the situation. And we're seeing that in the kind of the erratic nature of pricing. The market's trying to figure out how to manage the risk of that scenario. And it's a very complex situation. So that's not a simple thing to do. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Yeah, ECB didn't get the memo. Exactly. They're behaving in inflation control mode, which, you could argue is what the Fed should be doing, and let the banking sector shake itself out. The problem with that argument is the banking sector shaking itself out could cause another depression, if we have enough bank failures and bank runs. And so they can't take that risk. And, this is a classic example of the Fed's dual mandate. Stability to the banking system is number one. And, it's not unthinkable that we could have a big meltdown in the world banking system. And believe me, there's a bunch of people that are concerned about that, and they're rightly concerned. It's not likely, but it's certainly in the realm of possibility. And the odds are not bad. It's probably, God, if I had to just pick numbers right now for, world banking crisis like 2008 and 9, I'd say the odds, just seat of the pants, I'd say 70-30 against. That would be my guess. But that still means it could happen, right? Anyway, so that's my weekly recap. I'll leave it there if there aren't any other questions or comments. I like the recession better than the last one, more jobs and better pay. Yeah, this is true. The last one was really, it was really almost a depression for the short term. But, those terms don't really mean that much anyway. There are metrics that they use to identify the different, is this a depression or not? But I think, like most of economics, most of that is useless. It's the grand theory of supply and demand is really useful, but most of the economic forecasting models are really, really useless. Says a guy with an economics degree. Okay, let's talk about the second part. So this is going to be a fun topic. The topic is how to maintain perspective in any situation. And many of you may have heard other variations of this idea, and that's fine. This is my version of it, and I learned it from people that taught it to me about 30 years ago-ish. And, I know other people teach a similar idea a slightly different way and that's fine. That my purpose in discussing it here is to share some recent experience with it and also how it connects to trading. So let's start with what am I talking about? How to keep perspective on in any situation. Well, here's a really good life example of this. And before I go into the life example, I just moved, many of you know this, I just moved from Central California coast up into Washington State and on the water. And I had to go through some pretty severe road conditions and weather to do it. And so that's part of where this is coming from. But before I go to that, I want to just tell you a quick story that's meant to teach a lesson. I have two undergraduate degrees. One's in economics, as I just said. The other one's in Asian philosophy. And in Taoism and Buddhism, there are stories, parables that are meant to teach a lesson. And the Japanese name for those is koan, Koans. Koans, or a koan. And basically, this is a little short story that is meant to teach some philosophical life lesson. So this one's appropriate, so I want to start with it because I learned this back when I was in college and I always thought it was kind of cool. So there's a young student in the monastery with a very famous monk who's the master at everything. And the student is unhappy because he's not making progress fast enough. So one morning he's been up thinking about all night. I'm not learning. I'm not becoming a master. I'm not at peace and all the stuff he wanted to do. So he goes to the master and he says, Master, I have a problem I'd like to discuss with you. And the master says, okay, well, hold on to your problem. We'll talk about it after breakfast. Right now it's morning and it's time to make breakfast. That's what you do in the morning. And so the student says, okay. And he goes away and they make breakfast and comes back. And after breakfast, he comes to the master and he says to the master, that problem I had, I want to talk to you about it. And the master blows him off again, says, hey, that it's after breakfast. What do you do after breakfast? You have to do the breakfast dishes. If your problem keeps from breakfast to now, then, it'll keep us doing the dishes and then we'll talk about it after that. So they do the dishes and the master isn't around. The student's looking for him. And so the next thing you know, it's dinner time. And again, he goes to the master and he says, I really want to talk to you about this problem. And the master says, but it's time for dinner. And what you do at this time is you have dinner. Your problem, we'll discuss it later. And so the next morning, the monk is totally frustrated and he's packing up to leave. And so the master kind of comes by and says, what are you doing? He says, I'm leaving. I'm not learning anything. And the master says, I disagree. You're learning a lot. And he said, well, what do you mean? And well, why is it that you want to leave, student? And well, I'm not learning anything. I tried to ask you a question all day yesterday and you wouldn't answer it. And the master says, but I did answer it. You told me you had a problem that couldn't wait. And I told you to wait till after breakfast and then wait till after dinner. And then here it is the next day. A problem, student, is when your head's underwater and you can't breathe. That's a problem. You need to solve that really quickly. But if your problem kept from breakfast to lunch and then from lunch to dinner and then from dinner to this morning, you have no problem. And I just thought that was so cool when I first heard that. That just totally made sense to me. It's like perspective is everything. Perspective is absolutely everything. So how do you keep perspective, particularly when you're doing something like trading, which can be so emotional? You're dealing with your money and your sense of being right and wrong and all that. So how can you put things into perspective? Well, another quick story, the second one that I mentioned, I drove last week through some ridiculous weather, and I had tried to wait it out. I had postponed my driving for a week already for the first batch of ridiculous weather. If you're not familiar, the California coast and the Oregon coast got massive storms, one after the other. And so there's trees down everywhere. There's power lines out everywhere. There's one city that's been stuck without outside contact for 2 weeks in the California mountains. And it's just a total mess. And I waited for a week and I had no choice. I had to go. I had created a whole bunch of other deadlines that I couldn't extend. So I finally picked the best day I could. And I went last Tuesday and got on the road, and it was pretty clear for a little while. And I managed to get to the top of Northern California and get out of California without anything but a lot of severe rain. And I felt like, okay, this won't be too bad. But if you know the trip from California up here to Washington, you have to get over to Interstate 5. And that meant going through a bunch of mountain passes that had some very severe storms. And there was a couple of times where I had to make decisions. And I got to tell you, there's a couple of times I made the wrong ones. But if I had made a different decision in a couple places, I'd still be stuck there. That's how bad the roads are right now. And I was driving a U-Haul little van, pulling my car on a trailer. And so, this isn't a highly maneuverable vehicle. It's not four-wheel drive. It was just a truck. And so this was a really good chance to put this method into practice. And there's one specific example that I'll tell you after I tell you this method, and it'll make some sense what I'm saying, and then I'll connect it back to trading, and I'll do all that in the next 10 minutes. How's that? So the idea is this: if you divide everything in front of you into short snippets of time, and I like to use 2. So the next 2 seconds, the next 2 minutes, the next 2 hours, the next 2 days, the next 2 weeks, the next 2 months, the next 2 years, the next 2 decades. That's about as far out as I can go at my age to the upside. If you go back to my koan about the master and his student, if your head is underwater, that's a problem you need to solve in the next 2 minutes, isn't it? That's a very important problem. And so if you just look at your current situation at any given moment and say, okay, what's important in the next two minutes? Is there something? Often there isn't. And going back to my drive, I'd originally planned on stopping in like Coos Bay, Oregon, about halfway up, and seeing a friend and then driving the rest of the way. But once I got to Northern California, there was a giant rain and hailstorm, and I checked the weather and it was going to get worse. So at that point, I had to make a next 2 hours decision, and it was a totally different decision. But again, that perspective, it wasn't like getting myself to Washington. It wasn't that I was maybe going to see my friend in the next day and maybe get a hotel in Coos Bay. All of a sudden, when the weather changed like that, it became first a 2-minute decision. This weather's really bad. Okay. And then the next 2-hour decision, what am I going to do about it? If I stay here, I'm screwed because the snow's coming in. I'm going to get stuck on the northern coast of California and I'll be here for a week. Useless. So I couldn't stay. I could go back down and go back home to my old place. That wouldn't work. I just packed a moving van and I'm driving. So I had to decide how to proceed on my way. And I looked at it all and I said, okay, what's the thinking in bets here? What's the odds? What's the best decision I can make? It's to try to beat the new storm through Grants Pass, Oregon, which is the pass I had to go through on the Interstate 5. If I could get to Grants Pass before that storm, there was a good chance that I wouldn't get caught and I could get all the way to my destination up here by Tacoma and Washington. However, in order to do that, I was going to have to drive a 10-foot U-Haul moving van towing a car on a car trailer through some really bad roads that were only going to get worse was the point. So I thought, okay, follow lots of trucks real close. They kind of clean the road off and go, some places they were escorting people through. If they were requiring chains, I'd be screwed. But if they weren't requiring chains, I could maybe get through. Okay, so I had to do this, what's the next 2-minute correct decision thing a bunch of times. And one time it could have killed me. I got to Grants Pass, Oregon, and there were hotels there that were open, and there was a lot of people. I stopped for coffee and gas. And at this point, I'd been driving about 17 hours, and I'd had a little cat nap. So I wasn't fresh, but I wasn't sleepy at all. And I'm really good at that. And so I'm talking to people, I'm sipping coffee, and I'm trying to decide, should I stay here in Grants Pass? If I do that, so this is a next 2 minutes and a next 2 hours decision that could impact the next 2 months. If I get stuck here, I could be here for a week. Do I want to spend that much on hotels and whatnot? On the other hand, if I get on the road and try to get over the pass with everybody, I have no chains. I could buy chains, but even then, it wouldn't really help with this vehicle. I could try to get between trucks because they tend to plow the road. And so I kind of thought, all right, I do that. So instead, 2-minute decision, let's try to get over the pass and then we'll reassess. So in the next 2 hours, it was 2 hours to get over the pass. So anyway, to make a long story short, what I did, I got back on the road behind a truck. He knew what I was doing because I had seen him at the gas station where I got gas. And he was also really unclear about whether he wanted to even try the pass because, people had been stuck in passes like this for days. And, make sure you have enough water and some food with you. It was like that. A bottle to pee in, the whole thing. Batteries, a warm blanket because the car might not stay on. Anyway, long story short, again, we got going on the road, and right in front of us, there was a massive accident. And so I got stuck on that pass for the next 4 hours without moving. People were running out of gas. People in a little truck had to they ran out of gas, idling there, trying to stay warm. They had to push the truck off the road. And then luckily a trucker let them get in his cab with them to stay warm until the road reopened. Anyway, again, just little decisions can have massive impacts. And if you stay focused on what's the next thing in that sequence of importance, it really works well. Because once we got there, I was like, okay, we're stuck. I can't go backwards. I can't go forward. I had plenty of fuel. I just fueled up. So I'll stay here. I'll take a little nap for 2 or 3 hours and see what happens. And, again, other people were running out of gas because they hadn't prepared. They'd made the wrong decision. There were people like me that didn't have chains, and the beauty of it was we were all clustered together, so the highway patrol wasn't enforcing chains, and they said, those of you that don't, we're going to escort you out of here, so it's okay. So again, just a piece of luck just by making that decision. And so let me take this back to trading. There's a lot of times when you get really emotional in a trading event. There's lots of momentum, or you just got stopped out, or you just had a big winner. And so that's that 2 minutes. What's going on right now? What did I just do? And then, you could think of the market structure or the session highs and lows or the LRCs. That's kind of like going out one layer. So you're going to the 2-minute view, or in my case, let's go back to my main screen and I'll show you exactly how this works for me in trading. I think it's a really powerful idea. You might not, but I figured I'd share it. And, if any of you get anything from it, cool. All right. So that's kind of the thinking of the way I look at these LRC views and the SDs of the VWAP, the standard deviations of the VWAP, is I'm saying to myself, okay, what's happening right now? The next 2 minutes is right here. If I'm in a trade, that's the next 2 minutes, or I'm looking for a trade. I'm focused right there on what's happening right now. What's the traded volume? But by looking at the recent ranges through linear regression, I get a really good sense of what happened. Guess what? 2 minutes ago, my fastest one is in fact about 2 minutes. So there's my kind of 2 minute. We're going up pretty strongly. The other one's 5 minutes. This one's 30 minutes, and this is 60 minutes. So it's not multi-time frame analysis. It's multi-time frame perspective. So I just get a sense of, well, the highest we've been in the last hour or so, if from a regression point of view, is right about where we're at. So that could be interesting. There could be a short here. There could be a long continuing. We see absorption. So it just gives me an immediate sense of perspective. And it also helps me get past when I'm having a bad day. So here's another way to use that exact same method in your brain. There's roughly 200 trading days a year. There's more than that, but when you count for being sick and vacations or whatnot, call it 200 just to make it easy to calculate, right? So, what's happening right now in the next 2 minutes, I have 200 more days to do this. So it's really easy to keep in perspective anything that's happening right now, or any one winner or loser, just by thinking that way, just saying, well, hey, I'll have 200 more days like this. So this one day isn't really going to matter one way or the other. Again, so it allows you to just have a good sense of perspective. But then you can also say, well, here's what's happened in the last 2 minutes. Here's what's happened, in twice that, 3 times that, 6 minutes, And that's the idea, is the further out you go, the less important right now is, and the easier it is to have perspective about right now. And that's why I really love that koan so much. If you have a problem, if your head were underwater, you would have a problem. If you're in a trade and it's upside down and you're really losing money, okay, you need to solve that problem. You need to get flat, or try to work your way out if you have the skill to do that. But that's an immediate problem. But should you let that affect your entire day? No. Your entire day, at least in this case, has been at least 2 hours of trading since the open. In my case, more than that. And that's been a really good day. So any 2-minute event shouldn't have an overly adverse effect on the 2 hours or the last 2 days even. And by the way, that's one reason that I use, those of you who've heard me say this before, whatever my average profit for a day is, let's say I'm making $500 a day in an account. The absolute worst I will ever let any one day go is twice that to the downside. So say minus $1,000 in that example. That's one of my rules of risk management, because if I'm averaging $500 a day, the worst I've got 2 days to make up. That's the way I look at that. And again, that's not a coincidence that I do that around twos. I just find the number 2 to be useful for this exercise. The next 2 seconds to 2 minutes, that's my head's underwater, or, I'm stuck in a snowstorm, or I have to decide right now if I'm staying in Grants Pass or I'm going to get back on the road, because that decision could impact the next 2 weeks. And it easily could have. I could have been stuck in Grants Pass for 2 days. I mean, the road closed behind me after they took us through and caravan those of us that had gotten stuck that time out. The road closed for the next 2 days. So I would have been in Grants Pass with 3 days of hotel bill, going nowhere, and with no options. And so, I'm not saying that it's a way to understand what the right and wrong decision is, but it's a way to keep perspective about the two. And I took a chance that I could have died in the snowstorm because I didn't want to get stuck in Grants Pass for 2 days or 2 weeks. And was that necessarily a good decision? Well, I got to tell you, when I was sitting in the snowstorm and we weren't going anywhere and people were running out of gas and starting to freeze and stuff, I thought, this could have been a life or death decision on the wrong side. I could have screwed this up. But at least I'd prepared the best I could. I had a full tank of fuel. I had blankets. I had food. I had firearms. I could go hunt moose if I needed food, So I was more prepared than the kids in the truck in front of us who were drunk. We found out once they got in the trucker's truck to warm up. They had been in Grants Pass partying and they lived at the top of the hill and they were just trying to go home. And the girl was totally plastered and the guy driving shouldn't have been driving, but he was clearly had a few drinks too. And just that's the way people make life or death decisions without even realizing it. So that was an interesting thing to observe as well. Anyway, so that's my quick. It's right at the bottom of the hour now at 9:30. That's my quick tool and a couple of stories about it. I just like to break things up like twos. If two doesn't work for you, find another number, but try segmenting things into elements of importance by how soon they happen. What's happening right now? What's happening not right now, but soon enough that you have to pay attention, like 2 hours from now. And I find that's just a really good exercise in any situation where keeping perspective is important. And gosh, trading is definitely one of those. So that's my story. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I see a comment. And please post them. I will get to them all, and then we'll wrap up if there aren't any more. Alfredo says, Jeff, in order to have a better view of the market, the heat map really helps. And the ticks, forgot the name of your old software. Oh, it's Thinkorswim is that software. And the template for it is posted in the pit. This is what you're talking about, where, you can see the tick, which is just basically take all the equities going up and subtract all the equities going down. And, this is a broad index. It's not any one market. And the same thing with the advanced decline, just subtract the decliners from the advancers. And it gives you just a sense of what's going on. And remember, the futures, the equity futures are derivatives of the equities. So having a sense of that is useful. It's good for perspective. Exactly. If we only had some more for the fireside chat. Well, that was the idea, Pete, of doing these weekly, was to make it fireside chatty like. And look, one of the reasons I love trading is it's the ultimate meritocracy that pays right away. But I also like it because it's really connected to life. I think, the markets are very much like life, and there's a lot of lessons you can learn in life that apply to the markets and vice versa. Like I just said, with my kind of 2-2-2 thing, that couldn't have been more clear to me when I was driving, and I ended up driving straight through. That nap was the only sleep I really had for about 3 hours in that pass. And then I drove the rest of the way. It was 1,100 miles in a total of 27 hours. I was driving about 23 of those hours. And it's, that's dangerous. You know what? I was more focused than I'd be if I stop and sleep. I've done both. And I've driven across the country a lot of times, and that's just what I do. And that's also why I'm so good at scalping, because I can just get this laser focus on what's happening right now. And that's why I love trading, or to drive long distances. And that's why I love trading, because I don't listen to music. When I'm driving, I just look at the road and I think. And I had some really good ideas for things for TRG and for trading, trading setups that I'm working on, developing new trading setups. And so it was really cool to clear my head and do the drive. But boy, that could have been a bad decision. What else can I say? Let's see. Normally, I would not take note of Europe news yesterday. Yeah, no, the ECB, that was significant. That was very significant. That, again, this is going to be in the market, and I'm really curious to hear what the hedge fund guys have to say about that this weekend. We are going to have our call, and we'll also there's a Formula One race in Saudi this weekend, so we'll have two calls, one the Sunday and one the Monday. And I'm really interested in their perspective, because they know much more about this stuff than I do. But the Fed is really in a tricky spot now between banking risk and controlling inflation. So this is going to be a very interesting, certainly a few more weeks, if not quite a bit longer. I think this could could make it interesting for a long, long time. So anyway, all right. What are there any other comments or questions? Let's see. Curious. I have a question. Curious why you were able to crank out green days day after day. Are you looking for new setups? No, not boredom, because the market conditions are always changing. And even the reason that I can keep cranking out green days is because I adjust all the time. For example, Bob, the 15-minute break is a setup I've been aware of for 2 decades, but I just started trading it again a few months ago, and I've been talking about it in my live sessions. Just because the current conditions, it's really been handy to watch. Things are constantly evolving, and you know how we always say in TRG that it's about progress, not perfection. If you focus on your trading that way and just constant improvement, then it'd be silly not to look for new setups, because there's always new setups coming. There's another good example. That the end of today, I'm doing the class on trading the close. I've traded the close before in my career, but not nearly as aggressively as I have the last year, since I started using the VWAP again and using extremes of the VWAP, because that sets up a really good closing trade. And so those two really good answers to your question right there. I triple dare the Fed to raise it 50 basis points. Yeah, it'll be very interesting either way, won't it? Or both, probably. Okay, good comments, good questions. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Tales from the Tar Pits with the Dino. I will see you guys next at the close, and then the Sunday reopen this week will be a very short one, because I have something I have to deal with on Sunday, but we will have it. So if I don't see you at the close, I'll see you then. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the thank yous. I appreciate them.